Welcome to RiseWise Growthcast. Today we are interviewing and sitting down for discussion with Vince Scholten, president of the Hessel Farmers Grange here in Sebastopol, California. And Vince, I just am so grateful to have you here, man, and want to really kind of educate the people a bit, especially the farming community, all ag community, about the history of the Granges, what they are. You know, I talk to people and most often they're like, I think there's a Grange in the town I live in. I don't know what the hell, I think maybe they got ballet classes there, or, and the people don't really know what they are, but they've got a very in-depth history for our country, within our country.
So the Grange is about 151 years old now, started in 1867.
Yeah.
It was created through a bunch of guys on the East Coast who were having issues with the robber barons at that point in time. They were being charged to package their goods on the railroads at exuberant cost for their bags.
And who were the robber barons, for anybody that doesn't know?
The robber barons were the railroad owners at the time. And they were the wealthy industrialists who looked to take advantage of every aspect of making money they could.
Yeah.
And so
classic opportunists.
And they saw an opportunity to charge the farmers who were making money at that point in time because they were able to transport their products using the railroads.
Right. So they were able to increase the availability or whatever, but they were demanding increased production.
Correct.
And basically taxing them. And then partnering with other entities, I'm assuming probably
most
larger corporate, whatever, I don't know, in that era.
1867. So, we were just starting to get the industrial era really going.
Right.
And railroads were a part of that industrial era, which led the farmers to go, well, hey, I've got a much larger market now. To expand my sales to.
Yeah.
And the robber barons picked up on that and said, well, hey, we can solve that problem by just raising the rate of the bag that it was shipped in. And so a group of guys got together and said, well, hey, let's lobby against this, tax, they were calling it.
Right.
And the Grange was born. It worked. They pulled their monies together. And the Grange was born. From that, the Grange continued to grow very quickly because people saw the need for needing the laws changed to help agriculture.
Right.
So truly, it's a fraternal agricultural organization, and it has its roots based in agriculture. Not every Grange is a agricultural Grange. There are Granges that are different entities.
Right now, they've kind of morphed.
Well, they've morphed over time because the way corporate America happened, we saw corporate America take over, corporate farming take over. And as the family farmers dwindled and corporate farming took over, so did the population of the Grange.
Of the ag community.
Yeah. There was no need for a family organization if it was all owned by corporate entities.
Yep.
And so over the years, the 150 years, that agricultural organization dwindled and dwindled and dwindled, and corporate farming went up and up and up.
Right.
So
it
today...
really just phased out the mom and pop. It
pretty much phased community. Corporate America phased out the mom and pop, and then basically today there's a whole new insurgence in organic farming, hemp and cannabis farming, biodynamic farming, sustainable farming practices,
regenerative, all these methods. These are
methods. These are conscious methods that people are using today that corporate America is not. They see the bottom line, they see money to be made, and if they can spray it and get away from, labor costs, those corporate entities make more money.
Guaranteed. Every workaround in the book,
yeah,
that's hybridizing and genetically modifying and all these different
Correct.
things that create this, to them, it's a sustainable future for their company, not for the planet.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And they're not concerned by that.
Well, and the whole GMOs is another one where, that pollen can cross over the fence line and they basically own it. Some of our laws are not properly put into place. The same as what we're seeing with hemp and cannabis today. Mm-hmm. The GMOs was a hard fight.
Guaranteed.
Genetically modified is one of the things that we'll have further interviews about, but is quite dangerous to conventional, organic, sustainable,
absolutely,
breeding practices. Heirloom varieties, correct? Because we're cross-pollinating.
It can literally be the death of heirloom genetics. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, once you cross-pollinate it, they own it all.
Right. Exactly.
So I don't find that to be truly correct.
It's not comforting.
It's not comforting. And so the Grange can step up in those ways to help change those laws. We have lobbyists. That lobbying arm is in place. And we are looking to change some of those rules to benefit small farming.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question, was kind of before I jump to how the Granges can kind of serve the current ag community, especially the growing, as it's been coined so many times, the burgeoning cannabis industry, but and hemp industries. But I was curious about a couple different things real quick, because I had read somewhere that they had amassed, back in those early 1900s, they had amassed a following of 2 million people. That's why you see a Grange in every town center across the country. And that was a massive following for that era. 2 million people to be kind of fighting back against corporate and the banks and the railroad. That's massive, right?
You got to think we had a lesser population, and more of that population was into the farming industry.
Right, that's true.
Whether it was a family farm or the like, they say somewhere around 75-80% of people were involved in agriculture.
Yeah.
And so that has transitioned over the years, in that 150 years, to today, where less than 25%, or even less than that,
probably,
actually go into farming to feed the rest of, the nation.
Right. Wow. So that's interesting. And back then they had actually, was it a third party that they had tried to form? Because I think the Populist Party actually formed out of the Granges.
There is lots of organizations that have come out of the Grange.
Oh, really?
Our Future Farmers of America, high school agriculture program.
Really?
That, came out of the Grange. The 4-H came out of the Grange. There was a need and a want for it. The Grange is also something that, folks build on and can expand. So it changing over time as well. Mm-hmm. And hopefully with the right people put in place, we can change this for the better of all farmers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, that's great. Cool. Well, So go ahead on about just kind of some of the ways that they have been able to push policy and legislation forward in the past, and kind of how that could be applied, in today's agricultural booms.
So the Grange has, every year we have a conference, state conference, national conference. And what we make on our grassroots initiatives go to the state level and then to the national level. So a good example would be the chloropictins that were put in through chemical companies that were, ending up through the composting process and ending up back into our soil. So it was just a recycled chemical that continued to pollute. The Grange took a stand. We voted against it. It went to our lobbyists, and they then in turn go to our congressmen and legislators and changed that. so that those chemicals would not be used. We're also using it with the bee population, because the chemicals that they're using out in commercial ag spraying are disrupting our bee population.
Absolutely.
We had a lot of colony collapse disorder, 50% loss in beehives. Our bees are what pollinates all of our crops. For the most part, there's some other pollinators, but for the most part, it's little things like that make a huge difference in our ag world that we can change. For the last several years, we've been discussing hemp and cannabis, and being that it is 100% an agricultural crop, this is something that we have fought hard for. We have passed several resolutions on a state level. And those now go directly to our lobbyists, who then in turn are pushing that in our congressional world to help change those laws to help the little farmers.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, because we have a huge problem with that within the cannabis, and mostly the cannabis industry here, with compliance and over regulatory barriers to entry are just astronomical. And it's literally,
if you have big corporations feeding money into making that harder and harder and harder for these smaller farmers.
They're lobbying back there,
They're lobbying that.
Yeah. They have the money to do it.
And they're using, BS to get their regulations passed, so that we can make it harder and harder for hemp and cannabis farmers to continue. And so I find this is a direct fight against large corporations, and the Grange on a grassroots level has the opportunity to change those laws.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to change those laws.
It's amazing. That's amazing. And what I love about the Granges is already they have such a proven track record of being very much environmentally focused, and they really care about the kind of the very similar things that I would say the cannabis and hemp culture stems from overall. Yeah. Not that there hasn't been commercial cultivation, happening in the mountains where pollution has been a major issue, and dumping, diesel and oil and all kinds of, shit. Like it's been there's been that side of it. Yeah. But overall, this is a very, very conscious, forward-thinking culture. And that's why I believe in them so much,
I want to say, though, it's only conscious and forward thinking with the folks that are in the Grange. So those folks are the ones that are transitioning our industry slowly but surely. It doesn't happen overnight. There is no, turnkey way to do that. It's to start with the specific laws and to go after those, get them approved on our local level at the Hessel Grange, and move that into our state Grange, and then from there take it to the national Grange.
So with that being said, would it be more that much more important for people in every one of their local areas to find their local Grange and become more involved? And if so, where do they start?
So the first thing you can do is to join your local Grange, see what because what needs to happen is you need to have a consensus. So if you have, and here's what's happened with a lot of Granges, is that they're aging out. So most of the folks that are in these Granges are 80 years old.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so young farmers need to join that Grange, become active, and change that way of life.
Right.
And so it is Grange specific, it's person specific. How can I help? And this is an organization where your help can actually make a difference in the world.
Absolutely. And speak a little bit to just that culture of the Granges, because they have a very community-minded, support system. They're very seasonally earth focused, very kind of harmonized with Mother Nature, I would say. So I would like to, let people know kind of a little bit about what the Granges stand for, so to speak, in a way, on a daily basis, in a meeting sense, and kind of, because I know there's work trade, they support each other, they support the Grange, they have a hall they can meet in, they can rent it out to local folks to do events at or whatever. I mean, I'd love to, hear more about just that, because there's so much potential aside from the policy, which is the biggest thing for me, and like what feeds my soul and what I'm passionate about is pushing this industry forward to a conscious industry future, while ushering in some culture.
I think the Grange can make a huge difference in that regard as well. It's that grassroots.
Yeah. Totally.
And fortunately for us, it's not just the grassroots of our Grange, but the grassroots that starts at our Grange and becomes a much wider aspect.
Exactly.
So we can bring those, regulations that bring chemicals that harm bees to a national level and pass them and put pressure on the big, Pfizer, Monsanto, Dow.
Yep. And there's a lot of cannabis and hemp, flooding the U.S.
That's the new thing.
There's farmers.
Why are we importing hemp and cannabis from other countries when it all can be grown right here, clean and green?
Yeah, totally.
Some
standardization.
Well, sustainability, I think, is the future. And when you look at the Grange, we want it to be sustainable for another 150 years, if not into much further down.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that this can be.
I agree, and I think this could really be the resurgence, on an agricultural level that can help solidify that.
We saw a couple of years ago where the organic farmers started to join the Granges to help with organic standardization because of the organic standards were so tough and rigorous. I see that being able to help us with the hemp and cannabis as well. Start with specifics and think about how we can change our industry to make it easier for small farmers. Keeping those small farms and the diversification of small farms is the key to agricultural success.
I agree 100%. That's awesome. Yeah, I love that. And so back to a little bit about kind of the everyday kind of community aspect of the Granges. I love your coin term, which I swear you gotta trademark that shit. Grangerly, having a Grangerly conversation, just being a Grangerly person, and kind of building community in that manner. Like what all does that entail when it comes to the Granges? So
Grangerly is a term coined, and I'm not sure who coined it. It kind of came about. But Grangerly, I saw years ago when I joined the Grange that there was a whole lot of folks that were anti-establishment, all for chemicals, GMOs, and I had an issue with that.
Right.
And so rather than taking a negative aspect with them or not wanting to speak with them, folks told me, hey, it's the Grangerly way to have a conversation. And I sat down with several people who were the exact opposite of myself. I'm an organic, sustainable, biodynamic farmer, and they went against everything I stood for. And to sit down and have a conversation with them, respect their ideas, them respect my ideas and their perspective from both sides, became something that was really incredible. I mean, it was like a light bulb had come on, that, hey, we can have a conversation about this, even though we're, liberal or right wing.
Right.
And we could find middle ground to have a conversation and talk about the issues and the problems. And that term Grangerly comes out of that conversation, is that there's a Grangerly aspect to, having that conversation. It's a very heartfelt something to me, because I've come across some people who absolutely are anti-hemp and cannabis, and you have a conversation with them, and within that conversation, you're educating them, and by the end of the conversation, they understand where you're coming from. And this is folks that really never, ever wanted to see hemp or cannabis ever legalized, ever. And came to terms with it being agriculture 1, and it's not just used to get high.
Yeah.
There is a huge amount of medical.
And so much more to come. Like, it's the tip of the iceberg at this point. People don't even realize, even our culture, like, we don't realize that even though we've been surrounded by this plant for our entire lives, pretty much, I'm speaking for myself at that point anyway, that this plant is so powerful that the science is just pouring out as they continue to research it, and there's bigger and better research facilities being set up as we speak. It's just mind-blowing that this plant has been suppressed and oppressed as long as it has.
Yeah,
it's mind-boggling. So
it is mind-boggling, and I think that in the future, hemp and cannabis is not only going to be mainstream agriculture, but I'm hoping to keep it small farming.
Yeah.
And not let corporate America take over, because they are looking at it as a moneymaker.
Oh, guaranteed.
And I'd much rather see that in small farmers' hands, doing great things for the community. And the Grange is a community aspect. I mean,
that's what I love about it. It's going to take the people voting on that
correct
path, going that direction, or pushing for that path, or joining community organizations like the Grange to keep it from being something that's just because Monsanto's already got their hands in cannabis and hemp somewhere.
They do.
I'm sure.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I know it. I mean, they're, whatever, Scott's, all these different companies, and you can follow the paper trail, but it's just, in reality, the power still is within the people. You know what I mean? And
it is. And again, join the Grange, change the world. Do it a little bit at a time. Like I said, there's a lot of folks out there that want it to happen right now, and it's not a process that it happens today, like filling out a form. It's something that we have to work at to build community, to build our resolutions that we can pass on to our legislators, and properly written.
Well, not to mention figure out how to leverage each other's strengths and how to support one another, and figure out what everyone's strengths, in community regard are, and I think that's an important piece. And we also, it's tough because we live in the instant gratification era. You know what I mean? Like, I've caught myself trying to get used to TikTok because my video production partners are like, dude, this is, you're going to get lots of views on TikTok, you get a fast following. And, and it's like, oh my man, people's attention spans are literally this big. You know what I mean? It's like, so it's a struggle.
It is a struggle, and the Grange has struggled. It is struggling right now.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Grange halls that are empty.
I bet.
There are communities that were entirely family farms that are no longer family farms. They're all corporate entities, and those Granges have gone by the wayside. And I really hate to see Grange halls closed down and sold off because they're not being used.
This is why I thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me today, because I think that people don't understand what the Granges even are. They really don't understand the gravity of the situation.
Yep.
Especially from a grassroots. It doesn't even matter if you're a farmer. It's like, you could be a grassroots small business. You could be just a community member that is really community focused and oriented, and these Granges really create that kind of community within a larger community.
Well, and the diversification of the people. Yeah. So I'm going to just speak to that for a second. The diversity in our Grange Hall is mostly hemp and cannabis farmers.
Yeah. Because we're the first in the U.S. pretty much.
But Sebastopol Grange Hall, per se, is very much a very diverse group. And that diverse group is very productive.
I bet.
On all different levels.
Guaranteed.
And so I see with our Grange too, as we get more and more diversity into our Grange, we'll have a much larger arena for talking other things as well.
Yeah, it's exponential growth. When you're like able to grow and multiply those values, because people have different strengths and different
and
qualities.
Utilizing those strengths or knowledge, I find to be very important for our Grange. So we'll work on that in our Grange Hall. I love the group that we have right now. I think they're very active. Even though we started our Grange and had
COVID
COVID
us
happen.
back.
Yeah. But it should be back to normal hopefully soon.
Yeah.
And we'll continue our good work.
And in the meantime, we'll continue to try to virtually bring, some education pieces around the Granges and what we can do to support the people, the communities, especially the agricultural communities of hemp and cannabis. And I want to jump real quick back to just kind of giving suggestion. I know you can't really tell people how to approach their local Grange, but or the politics of that, because they're very different. Every Grange could consist of very different personalities and very different people, or have very different agendas. But at this point in some of these, especially in the counties, Mendocino, Trinity, Humboldt, Lake, all these different areas, like if they can find their local Granges and they want to start getting involved, what would you say is the most respectful way to kind of get in there? Like if we're maybe pushing some legislation forward, we can give them a heads up. They can go become members. Can they vote then as a member on something that gets passed to a state level?
So I happen to be the ag chair for the state of California.
Right.
So when we go to our state convention, I go before the whole group and read the resolutions and try to get a positive or a yes vote on those resolutions. That's where your leaders of those Granges have 2 delegates from each Grange in the state of California that can vote on that.
Right.
There are already quite a bit of Granges out there that are hemp and cannabis friendly. Cool. Humboldt is one.
Yep.
And they also came out at state convention this last year and spoke to the aspect of us needing to create laws and regulations that benefit the small farmers. And so the couple that we had going this last year passed overwhelmingly. There was no nay votes at all. So this is something that, there are other Granges. They all have a say. So that things don't get out of hand.
Of course.
Let's say we want to, I'm trying to look for a example, but if you were trying to do some crazy aspect of, I want to hand out free heroin. It's going to go from your grassroots at your Grange Hall to the state level, and they're going to laugh at you.
Yeah.
And you're going to get a no vote.
Yeah.
But if you put it to an educated person and state the facts, you should have a positive outcome. Not necessarily for heroin, but
right. But anything that's especially agriculturally and environmentally kind of forward thinking in a
correct. And the Grange has always been pretty progressive.
I've seen that. I mean, they allowed women to vote before women were allowed to vote. Correct?
That's correct.
And things like that.
Women were allowed to vote in the Grange before they were actually allowed to vote for a president.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Very progressive, very sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've set it up, or the forefathers have set up the Grange to live out its life going and being progressive.
Totally.
And I think that that's important. There's some of the traditional stuff that people kind of go, well, that's a little outdated. You can change that in your Grange Hall. Change your bylaws.
Except for the Pledge of Allegiance, right? No, that's yeah, but whatever.
Correct. There's a couple of things that they want you to do that just hold to the tradition.
And I was going to say, there's some things that are worth it. You know what I mean? Like, we did it all through kindergarten and grade school, and why not? You know what I mean? If it really is that is going to something that simple that we have to compromise on to push this thing forward, no matter what your spiritual or religious preference, don't let that deter you or shy you away, because it is more about the community that you're building.
Right. Here's another example, and that is that they require to have a Bible open during your meeting.
Really?
So Sebastopol, of course, is a very progressive Grange, and we used to have 4 different Bibles out there.
Nice. Love that.
I mean, what's to make us not put a Canna Bible out there?
Yeah.
It is something that you believe in. It is something that should be honored and should be open to the aspects of all of your membership.
That's why I appreciate the Grangerly aspect, is that all of those perspectives are valid.
Correct.
You know,
and you want to make everybody valid.
Yeah. That's what community is about, and that's what really building together is about.
Well, and it's building our community, but we're trying to do something different here at the Hessel Grange, and that is just to make it an agricultural grange. So we want to talk farming. We there's a lot of granges doing a whole lot of good work out there for the community.
Amazing.
We want to do that for the agricultural community.
Yeah.
And we are in a position to do that with 95% of our membership being farmers. And
Amazing.
I'm very proud of that we started a farmers grange.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is literally, and to the cannabis community and hemp community, like, it is an opportunity to have a resurgence of a grassroots agricultural community that has withstood the test of time, obviously.
Yep.
So, I think it's a beautiful thing. I will ask, do you know is there any reason for the different granges in different townships or cities throughout the state to communicate with each other, other than the meetings, that are held statewide?
As a grange,
do they Zoom? Do they do any virtual communication?
They are not right at this point.
To talk about potential policies and legislation that could work on together?
No, that's not in play at this moment, but it's not open? Like it couldn't.
Cool.
Yep. The Grange can change by what we want to do. So if we want to, congregate with our other Granges, or congregate with Granges that are writing resolutions, say we want to do a collaboration with Humboldt Grange, rather than writing 2 resolutions to go to the state level, have them work on one and us work on one.
Yes, perfect.
So communication is
key. So it really breaks it up and takes the workload off of one entity.
Correct.
So
or we're not just repetitively doing it.
Right. Exactly.
Like when we originally...
a lot of time waste to read through and be like, well, yours is better, well, mine's over here, well, let's merge them.
And we can do that at the state level,
right.
At our convention. But I think that depletes our purpose. We want to have them work on one thing, us work on another. And I think that collaboration is something in the future that we can move much more closer to.
That'd be great. Yeah, especially if more and more of the younger community, the cannabis community, the hemp community, whoever is, again, as the kind of older Grange participants, 80s and the kind of last of the dying breed of the grassroots agricultural folks, which make up a lot of the Granges, like you said, as they kind of pass on the baton, hand off the torch, I'm sure they'd be happy to hand it off to people who are passionate about agriculture and building community and sustainable.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Vince, thank you so much, man. I think that's a great sum up for our first episode, and I'm hoping I can work out our camera issues so we're not too blurry, but we'll see. We may refilm, but this was too money. I think it's at least got to be some podcast material.
Awesome. Look forward to doing much further with our interviews.
Yeah, I'm excited to cover more
people
topics
about agriculture.
Thank you, man.
Yeah,
I'm excited to cover more topics with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Awesome.
Like, this is huge.
Thank you.
It's going to be big for the community. Thank you guys so much for being here.
See ya.
Thank you. Peace. All right.